Good morning to everyone, and welcome to another What's the Point with Josh Dorrel and Pete Obermueller today. This podcast is all about the Wyoming economy and how we work ourselves into a much more diverse and maybe vibrant and complex economy. And today I'm having the pleasure to sit down with Pete Obermueller from the Petroleum Association of Wyoming, PAW, I believe is what we call it. And Pete, we're going to get into all kinds of things today, but I wanted to just kind of get a little bit of background from you and understand a little bit about who you are, where you came from,
Sure.
A little bit about your family, and we can take it from there.
Sure. Well, thanks, Josh. Thanks for the invite. Excited to do this. Love the work that you do. Business Council is so much dynamism comes out of this office and comes from you and all that. It's great to watch. So thanks for having me.
Okay, let me stop you right there. So we have one rule in the podcast, and that is no compliments. So at least toward the Business Council and me. So you've broken that one. So
Good.
we're off to a good start.
Perfect.
Let's keep rolling.
Perfect. It's funny. One of my favorite podcasts I listen to has that same rule. I should have known. All right, it's out of the way.
All right.
Last rule broken. So I grew up in Casper, and I went to Natrona County High School. And backing up from there, both my parents grew up in Wyoming. My dad was born in Texas, but then moved to Sheridan relatively soon after that. His dad was a Lutheran pastor, and so moved around a lot as pastors do.
Mm-hmm.
But he spent most of his boyhood in Sheridan, and my mom grew up here in Cheyenne, they met because my dad's dad became pastor at the church where my mom was going after some time later. So
Sure.
Sheridan and Cheyenne basically,
Yeah.
and then my grandpa, the pastor, he ended up his last serving congregation was in Warland,
Okay.
and then he retired at Bighorn. And so all growing up, my boyhood and then middle school and high school, just spending so much time in and around the Bighorns. And that's where I kind of first did any sort of real camping, learned how to fish, I went hunting with Grandpa, I started backpacking, all that stuff was Bighorns. So that's kind of, so I love the Bighorns, is my point.
Yeah, well, not a bad place to do all of that. You're a little bit spoiled, right?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, fantastic. My parents got married. They moved to Casper. Kind of crazy stories about that. Like a lot of people, they both were teachers at first.
Okay.
My mom remained a teacher. My dad went a different direction, but they were in Arkansas teaching, in fact, and they desperately wanted to get back to Wyoming, but there were no teaching, no availability in any of the public schools. So the only availability turned out was in a one-room schoolhouse in the middle of Converse County on the Alamand Ranch. And so they took that job and they taught like K through 12 for the rancher kids and the ranch hand kids out. Like they lived in like a sheep herder hut and taught in the one-room schoolhouse in order to get back to Wyoming, which is wild. They have the craziest stories.
But let's think about that for a second. So they loved Wyoming so much that they were kind of willing to really, that's a sacrifice, right? Like that's a big change probably, and to be able to do that. And then obviously they didn't stay there the whole time. So then where did they go after that?
Yeah, my dad realized, relatively quickly that teaching wasn't for him. And so he ended up going back to University of Wyoming and got a CPA degree and did the rest of his career until he was in the legislature for the past 8 years, was a CPA. And my mom kept teaching and all that. So they were in Casper at the time, and that's where I grew up and went to Natrona County. And then I left the state for 20 years, which I know is a topic that's important to you. Is what is it about leaving, and then what is it about coming back?
Right.
I think is a big question because it happens a lot, and it happened a lot with my cohort of high school friends and colleagues. Almost all of us left for a period of time, and nearly all of us are back.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But I went to Minnesota. I went to a small liberal arts school in St. Paul, Minnesota called Concordia, and then I got a Master of Public Policy degree from the University of Minnesota. and then did some private sector stuff. I worked for a band of all things, Josh.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What kind of band?
So it was an independent Christian music.
Okay.
It was, and I was like the mean manager dude. Like I was the guy who I booked the shows and I planned the tours and I handled our merch and all that stuff.
So this is all
for
coming
5 years.
together for sure, right?
Yeah.
This is
It's great. It's totally linear.
For
to
5
work
years?
for oil and gas.
5 years?
5 years, yeah, in between undergrad and grad.
okay. So in between undergrad and grad, you worked for the band.
Yeah.
And then you went to grad school,
Right.
So public policy and band management seem like they're not really.
I know.
So help me with that.
I know. It's so funny, like looking ahead a little bit from there. So when I was after grad school and I was trying to I always wanted, even back to high school, I wanted to be in policy and politics and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Mostly policy, it turns out.
Mhm.
And so when I was trying to apply for jobs on Capitol Hill, like trying to make that happen, it's funny how it's hard to convince people of the transferable skills of working for a band and then go to Capitol Hill. Like,
I don't know. I mean, I think I can see that. I think, well, clearly it worked. You were able to get a job.
well, it worked, yeah. I mean, you know this. Like a lot of things, I got the job because of people I know. Like I started out working for Barbara Cuban, who's a former congresswoman who was first elected in 1994, and then she was at the tail end of her career. But I went to high school with her son, and so like that connection opened that door.
Right.
And then so she took a chance on me, even though I'd spent the last 5 years working for a band. But I tell you, Josh, working for the band was way better training than going to grad school. I kid you not.
Oh, absolutely.
It was amazing training.
Yeah.
Just like we didn't sell widgets, like we sold concerts, but like it was $1 million a year or more operation, and all these things needed to happen, and all these people needed to interact with all these people and make these shows happen, and and it was great. It was great training for working on Capitol Hill.
Oh, I can imagine because a lot of logistics, a lot of different people, a lot of different personalities involved.
Right. I mean, essentially managing hundreds of volunteers all over the country and internationally all year long. So, but you'd say like just on the resume it says you work for a band, and it was like, okay, so
can't wait to see what shows up. Right.
Carrying speakers and smoking weed is basically what people thought.
That's a wild story. So then you spent a few years in grad school.
Yeah.
And so
2
you
years.
had two different experiences, but both applicable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now you could take the sort of the street smarts, the how to get stuff done, because you got to get stuff done when you're doing a show. It's not like, well, eventually we'll do this thing. No, it's like tonight.
Yeah.
It's got to happen.
Right.
And then you have the background in academia where you can say, okay, and here's theory and all of that, but I know how to get stuff done.
Yeah.
So tell me how those two things came together for Capitol Hill. What were some of the things you worked on?
Yeah. Capitol Hill so I worked in Capitol Hill for about a decade.
Okay.
And for Barbara Cuban, and then when Cynthia Lomas ran for the House, won the House seat, she kept me on her staff, and then ultimately I ended up her legislative director, which is, Capitol Hill is divided into kind of policy people and communications people generally, and so the legislative director kind of manages the policy side of a congressional office, kind of how it works. So it was really fun, and I mostly handled, when I started, I handled telecommunications issues, which was fascinating because I didn't even know that was an issue.
Right.
Like I didn't know there was any policy things related to
you picked up a phone, and
right?
That's how it worked.
Yeah, exactly, which is funny. But it was kind of the first experience of learning that I could be interested in pretty much anything, once you get going on it.
Yep.
And what was cool about telecommunications at the time is it was not partisan. It was population divide. Urban areas and rural areas have very different needs when it comes to telecom. And so we had, it didn't matter what the party affiliation was. It would matter kind of where you were demographically. Anyway, so that was really fun. And what was great about to answer your question about the combination is that I had a decent understanding from grad school about how the process
Yes.
and
Yep.
and a lot of the theory.
Right.
Though relatively early on, I was steered away from political science and more towards public policy, which is a little bit more. It's a little bit more practical, a little less designed for, tweed jackets with elbow patches, like that kind of stuff, and a little bit more for work.
Yeah. For work,
So I had a little bit of the theory, a pretty good understanding of the process, but then from working for the band, I had learned about how to like try to work with other people to advance a particular goal. And on Capitol Hill, I mean that's all it is. It's all day, every day. You're trying to advance a vision that your boss has and try to figure out one way or another how do we get this passed.
Yeah.
And I mean anybody watching this knows how dysfunctional Congress is, and it's only gotten worse since I was there. At least that's my impression.
Do you think that was the cause you leaving? Was what maybe caused the dysfunction?
Yeah, I mean clearly, yeah.
So you got to do some practical stuff. If you don't mind, let's take a quick tangent to broadband, which is today's telecommunications.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, that divide still exists.
Yeah.
With the density of population and the ability to serve dense populations, and the West, we're in a different spot.
Yeah.
Right. Like we're in a different spot in terms of if you run fiber in a densely populated area, it gets used and it's pretty cheap per person.
Yeah.
But in the West, it's not like that. Is that a similar situation that you experienced with telecom?
Definitely. And at the time, I mean, it was broadband. Even then, it was internet rollout, and it just now it's constantly like, what's the next great technology that you can access in a big city, and how quickly can you access that in Cheyenne or Rollins or then Meeteetse or Lingle.
Yeah.
And it's a real tension because everybody wants access to all this stuff right now. And so the tension to me, Josh, I'm interested in what you think about this, is where between I've chosen to live in Lingle.
Yeah.
And that's the lifestyle I want.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want access to all of this amazing stuff.
Right.
And what's the public policy role in that?
Yeah.
So initially, you think about a company like Union Telephone, 110-year-old family-owned telephone company in Wyoming, based out of Mountain View.
Yep. The
whole idea, they connected people by stringing telephone wire around barbed wire fences.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And now they have a broadband offering and all that stuff, and they've evolved too. But the policy back then was, look, the telephone is only as good as if you can call your family back on the farm.
Right.
And so the idea of universal service was, we have to have universal service, otherwise this technology doesn't make any sense.
That's
and so Wyoming and other rural areas really heavily subsidized in order to make that happen. I totally believe in that. I think that's totally right.
Yeah.
Same with electricity, all of that. As those technologies grow, the public policy changes a little bit.
Yeah.
How quickly do we get it out? How can we get it out?
Yeah.
How much responsibility does somebody have for, look, I love Lingle, I want to live there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to accept the fact that I'm going to be maybe on Starlink or something else.
A little bit, some different technology.
Right.
Well, and that's a really interesting question, I think, from a federal perspective versus a state's perspective, right? Like we have a lot of small communities and a very sparsely populated state.
Right.
So to be able to kind of have that level of connection, I can kind of see the federal government's point of view. I mean, we'd like to have them pay for it, but at the same time, they have an ROI that they want to meet. They have an obligation to the populace, right? And so it's a balance there. And so then you think about what could the state do to pick up that burden, or where does that burden get spread, or what technology allows it to be borne by the consumer, right? And that chain is pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you want free market, but at the same time, it's sort of like, well, I don't know if the market's going to address super high speed internet in some of these rural places.
Right. And a little bit more in my current field is the same questions are happening with electricity and
Mm-hmm.
with power markets too, is that the markets aren't going to bring power to small communities or even more rural standalone structures out in Wyoming.
That's right.
And the way that we deal with that is that we subsidize it with large power users,
right?
Oil and gas operators, data centers, those sorts of things that use an enormous amount of power, short lines, and pay heavily for it in order to subsidize the ability to get it to everybody else.
That's right. Yeah. That's a pretty complicated situation.
Yeah. Right.
But okay. So all right. So you worked on Capitol Hill. So with college and Capitol Hill was about 20 years. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And then talk to me. What's that?
And
the band.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah. Like, you don't want to gloss over that. That's clearly
5 years
an important part. So tell me about the decision and what that sort of like. How did you make that calculation between, your work that you've done and being able to get back here? Because you clearly wanted to get back here. Well, tell me, why'd you want to come back?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm not sure I can fully answer it still. I've thought about it a lot. Part of it was, growing up in Wyoming, and I knew if I went out to do work on Capitol Hill, I wanted to do work for Wyoming. Mm-hmm. There's all sorts of policy gnomes out there who just they don't care the state that they work for. They're just out there to do the policy work. And so I work for a member from Georgia, I work for a member from Iowa, just whatever.
Yeah, policy.
I couldn't that wasn't. I needed to have a connection to a place and work for that place. And obviously that was going to be Wyoming. It could have been Minnesota because had kind of become my second home. That's where I met my wife, and so we were married by the time we moved out. And then we had our two oldest kids while I was working in Capitol Hill in Virginia. And so, and I have to work for the band. I was getting a late start. So Capitol Hill is run by kids. I mean, quite literally. I think someone would have to fact check my numbers, but I think it's on the house side. I think the average age of a personal office staff is 24 years old or something like that. 23, 24. I didn't start in Capitol Hill till I was almost 30. And then by the time, I'd been there for a while, I was kind of pushing 40, absolute fossil. I got two kids and only, late 30s.
You don't match what everybody else is up to.
Yeah, right.
So there was life stage is different.
Yeah. I think everyone who goes out there gets to a point, they get to a crossroads of am I going to be a lifer out here or am I going to go do something else? Yep. And right at the point where I was kind of talking about that, thinking about that, and talking about it with my wife, the county commissioners here in Wyoming came calling for a new executive director. So the County Commissioners Association. Right. It's a weird trade association. It's a trade association like PW, except for that all their members are only county commissioners. Yeah. It's a pretty cool job. And they came knocking, and it seemed like I didn't even know what they were. I had to call friends back here. I was like, "This is a legit organization."
Is this the thing?
Who are these people? And so that seemed right. It seemed time to kind of let the kids do their thing on Capitol Hill. And be out here. And thankfully, my wife and kids were into it, and it's been home for them.
But you had been back and forth, obviously, because you have a family connection here still, right?
Yeah. My parents still live in Casper. In the house I grew up in. So I've been back and forth, and of course, working for a member of Congress from Wyoming, and travel back here a lot and all that. So for me, it was coming home. My wife's from Wisconsin. For her, it was making a westward journey.
Right.
So it was certainly different and a change for her.
Right.
But my oldest kids are, their memories are basically all here. They have fleeting memories of Virginia.
Okay.
But why they grew up here.
And you just had someone graduate from high school, right?
I did. And you just had someone graduate from college, I believe.
I have two out.
Amazing. Yeah, tell me how it goes.
I'm still figuring that out too.
My oldest daughter just graduated from high school. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
She's going to go to school in Philadelphia. So
Nice.
speaking of kids leaving.
Yeah, but that's an exciting thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like to be able to go and experience other things and kind of get a feel for what else is out there.
Right.
And that can be I think that's transformational. And when it comes to the ability to come back after seeing those things, that can change the way you see Wyoming, but also the shape of Wyoming in the future.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, I think that's an important thing
Yeah.
to do that. And you and many of your friends are kind of exceptional in that if you went away for that period of time and were able to come back, it's not that common. The data doesn't bear it out that the boomerang effect actually happens in big enough. Let me say it like this: it happens in anecdotes and friends we know, right?
Sure.
But it doesn't happen in big enough chunks to make a big difference in our economy.
Is that right?
Yeah. So it's great when it happens, and we should continue that. I think we should, everybody should come back home. But at the same time, it's a challenge. That process that you undertook is a challenge because of the number or the lack of numbers of opportunities.
That's
How many county commissioner associations are there?
like nationwide?
No, in Wyoming.
Yeah, there's the one.
And how about how many PAWs are there?
Yeah, right. No, I get your point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where we are, but I think it's important, right? It's important to go out and see how other things are done and bring that know-how back.
It's tricky, isn't it, Josh? Because there's I don't know if I would have stayed in Wyoming that I would have had the expertise to do the things I'm doing now. So, like that part was necessary.
Yeah.
But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what I think I'm hearing you say is that you want to try to figure out how to, maybe two things. A, see if more people can do that boomerang.
Yep.
But two, like try to not need the boomerang in the first place, like by having them stay here. Is that?
Well, but it's a tough balance because you want people to go out and experience things, but have the choice to come back. And I think what you see in other states is that people can kind of go out, experience things, and get maybe more worldly views, and then bring that back because of the number of opportunities. Whereas we're about double the amount of out-migration of the national average.
Right.
And so that's the challenge. We still want that because there's the natural tendency to do that, and we should encourage that. But then we want to create a place where there are enough opportunities where if you want to come back, it's easier. Like you don't have to make those challenges or that decision process so hard.
Sure.
So if we can make it easy to come back and the opportunities are equal or they're marginally equal and close enough, that's great. I think right now that's sort of the challenge.
Yeah. Well,
but that's why we're here.
This is your whole job.
That's our job.
I'm relying on you to fix this.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we'll. That's good. So you've got a couple kids who are. You said you have.
We've got 3 daughters.
You have 3 daughters. Okay. So one's graduated high school, heading to Philadelphia for education.
Right.
And then what is her view of Wyoming? I mean, and it's going to be shaped quite a bit in the next few years, I'm sure. But what does she think about Wyoming?
That's a great question. We haven't had a specific conversation about that recently. But I think, I hesitate to speak for her. I think she's a little bit nervous about the school she's going to is in Philly. So it's going to be an urban school and that'll be very different than, being in Cheyenne. Yeah. And so I think she's nervous about that. But she's also very excited. I think she does see, she loves Wyoming. We love to go backpacking. She likes to fish. She's a Wyoming kid in that sense. But I think she does see it as somewhat limiting, for her, personal and professional growth. I think it's probably fair to say. Yeah. And I think both can be true. You can love the place and still feel that way.
Absolutely.
So, I'm happy for her and excited. I think it'll be good.
Yeah. I think that particular situation that you're talking about, that loving the place but still feeling that a little bit, that maybe that tension, that exists for all of us.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
So you went from the County Commissioners Association to PAW.
Correct.
Okay. And And so as you look at PAW, obviously oil and gas are kind of a big deal in Wyoming, right? Like they're a really big deal in Wyoming.
Right.
You grew up around a lot of oil and gas, I'm guessing, because growing up in Casper, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a town that in a lot of ways is pretty dependent on that, or at least has been in the past.
It's certainly, I mean, it's more so than Cheyenne for sure. Right. It rises and falls with oil and gas. Absolutely. It's gotten a little bit, it's stabilized a little bit.
Right.
Even since the days when I was growing up. But it's still, it definitely, it sinks and swims with natural resources.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad was a CPA, mom was a teacher, like I mentioned. And so we weren't directly in oil and gas.
Right.
And I didn't really have an oil and gas background when I took the job. And that was, I did, after doing telecom in DC, then I transitioned to doing energy and public lands type work, because that's so important for Wyoming that usually the legislative directors out there or that level handle energy stuff. So that's why I took that over. So I understood the policy of it. I did not know anything about really the business of oil and gas. And that part's been the learning curve for me, is to understand just how that decision making works for oil and gas companies in Wyoming. So that's been an interesting learning curve. I'm still on it, to be honest. It's more complicated than I knew.
Than you thought?
Yeah, for sure.
So talk to me though. Okay, first of all, the most important thing you want to get out in this podcast is PAW versus
versus PAW.
PAW.
Yeah,
we don't say PAW anymore.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you. So
seems like a challenge to change that.
I know. Well, I had some experience with trying to get the name right, because for whatever reason, people, Senator Lummis, people out here know how to say her name. Nobody else knows how to say Lummis for whatever reason. They always say Loomis. Yeah. And so it was like a constant, I was working for her, and it was a constant battle of like saying that rhymes with hummus.
And also the two M's. Yeah. We changed that.
It seems obvious.
It seems that there's two consonants.
Nearly impossible. So same kind of thing going on. But here's what happened. But when I took the job, my kids were still young enough. Took the job at PAW. My kids were still young enough where like Paw Patrol was a thing. Yeah. Well, it still is a thing.
I guess it's still a thing, but just not to your kids.
Yeah, not as much to my kids. And so they just thought it was amazing that I I worked for Paw Patrol, and so they even got me like a Christmas ornament of I can't remember his name now. They'll be so mad at me, but the dog. So and then like to make matters worse, like our newsletter at the time when I took over in 2019, and 2019, like this is not that long ago, and we were sending out a paper newsletter every month that was called Paw Prints. So
that's hard, right? Like when you are owning Paw and you want to change Paw, that's
right. So kind of day one.
Just for the record, I always call it PAW Prints.
Did you? Yeah.
Always. Yeah.
PAW Prints. Yeah. Day one decision was scuttle the newsletter and scuttle the name, and then I just started I didn't put out this fatwa. I just said I just personally started calling it PAW. And then my staff kind of picked up on that, and then so board members started slowly people are getting better at calling it PAW and not PAW.
Good. Okay, so that'll be a test for us. We'll start to count that up and see. Maybe over time it'll kind of get closer to zero.
Yeah, it's the people who know how to say Togedy or Vitavu. Yeah. If you hear someone say, "Well, I was at the PAW thing," you'll be like, "Oh, you're not."
Yeah.
No.
Okay, good. Yeah. That'll be good. Okay, so for PAW, you're thinking policy, but you also are, I guess, helping out with the business association of it too. How do those two things work together?
Yeah, so it's a 501c6 trade association. Okay. So all of my members, we represent the whole start to finish oil and gas in Wyoming. So what's different about Wyoming on oil and gas than really any other place in the lower 48? Alaska's a little this way too, but in the lower 48, Wyoming is still exploratory. We don't know the full scope of what we have in Wyoming, and we have a good sense about kind of what's there. What I mean is we don't know whether it's accessible, and it's pushing the limits of our technology to get it. So
to get it
yeah,
cost effectively.
so the Powder River Basin, which is basically Converse, Campbell County, and Johnson, and then west into Weston and Crook and those. That's where our best resource is right now. That's where most of our rigs are, and where we're getting really high quality wells and oil. But the Powder River Basin has 14 stacked reservoirs that go super, super deep. And then also it spreads out west and east. So we're really good in the center and in a few of those stacked plays. We don't know the horizontal bounds or the vertical bounds of the Powder River Basin. And so that's pretty exciting for Wyoming. And there's just lots of runway there. But it's really pushing the edges of our technology to figure out how to get it in Wyoming. So all I was saying, represent the people who are doing like that exploring, and then the people who, once we can figure it out, the people who actually drill it out of the ground. And those are the companies you would have heard of that drill in Wyoming: Continental, Occidental, Devon, those sorts of Jonah, Pure West, those sorts of companies. And then I represent the transportation, the pipelines, get it from there to the places in the state and the rest of the country that need it, and then I represent the refineries that actually turn it into the products.
So you do have the whole value chain.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's the only thing we don't represent are the C-store, like the gas stations where you fill up your car. That's a different
retail
side. It's not what we do. Then there's all these people that make it all work, Josh. I think, like most people, this is what I thought, that you have an oil, just all these people, 19,000 people directly work in oil and gas. And I just thought it was just like people swarming all over these rigs. That's not really it. Like, there's about 100 people attached to an actual rig drilling for oil that work specifically on the rig. There's so much else that happens around that, from petroleum engineering to like wildlife biologists, environmental consultants, attorneys, of course, permitting people, all these people that work that aren't at the rig itself, but make it all happen.
Make it work.
Yeah, exactly. So those are all part of PAW, and which makes it pretty exciting. There's a lot of different things going on there. So we do two things really. We advocate on behalf of all of those members and their different facets, and to try to make sure that public policy is in a place that's advantageous for oil and gas production. But then also, to your point, what I try to do is connect the dots between all these people that do all this work, so that they can not only like learn from each other on best practices, but make business deals with each other, and advance advance the industry in that way as well. We have it's constantly turning over, so we have new entrants coming in. They don't know all the players, and one of the things I think PAW provides in value is you come into PAW and then you have access to this whole to the whole ecosystem.
So you can provide those connections and make that a lot easier, because you're right, the players change, right? The names that you might have mentioned before 5 years ago, those weren't the names, right? Some of them weren't.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
And so with that, so there's the advocacy part, and then there's the connection part. When you think about, do you help develop policy then too, or is that separate? How or do you just sort of like weigh in on policy? How does that work?
You mean at the state level or federal level?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair to say we probably develop more policy in the state than the Fed. Who knows who develops policy at the federal level?
Yeah.
It's one of the most fun things about working in Wyoming is if you have a good idea on any topic, it doesn't need to be whatever. Yeah. If you have a good idea and you can convince a couple people about it, you can turn it into state law
in a
year. Yeah. It's amazing.
Right.
There are things that I worked on the entire time in DC, a decade of work, and ultimately nothing to show for it. It just it's Sisyphean. You're just like, it's really hard. So Wyoming's cool in that way, especially if you like a little job completion.
Yeah.
So we'll do. we'll help to drive policy here.
Okay.
In fact, passed two bills this last session that were really, really novel. Nobody else in the country is doing these two ideas, and Wyoming is it's such a great laboratory for this kind of stuff because we can try it. If it doesn't work, we can get rid of it, and that's pretty fun.
Yeah. It's really fun. So speaking of policy, and I'm a big fan of putting policy back in politics. I think that's what it's for. I think is that you tell me you have the masters in this. But politics is the idea is to create policy that helps your state or your nation work, right?
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit more about those two pieces of policy that got done this last session.
Yeah, happy to do it. I could talk all day about this idea of politics and policy. I'm a big believer in the legislative branch being the most powerful and in a lot of ways the most important branch.
Okay.
Now at the federal level we've abdicated that. We don't do that anymore.
Okay.
But you always hear it's become like sort of just a trope that the co-equal branches of government. That's not really true.
Right.
The Congress is the Article 1 first named most powerful branch if they decide to own it. Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. And the founders I think on this were brilliant is that they putting policy back into politics. Congress is where those fights are supposed to happen.
Right.
And it's okay that there's factionalism and fighting and all that as long as there's a process to move through it.
Like the fighting state doesn't make sense, but it's like disagreement is how the best ideas come out.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And you can, as long as there is a process and a willingness to own that process, then you can come up with things like Wyoming still can do here. Right. We can't do it at the federal level right now. What happens at the federal level is they fight over the stuff and then just give the executive branch the authority to write all the rules.
Right.
So and then they can turn around to their constituents and say, well, geez, heck, that Biden administration or that Trump administration, wrote the rule, and I didn't like that. These unelected bureaucrats. I'm like, well, yeah, but you guys have the power.
And so if you don't mind, let's follow this a little bit because I'm learning a lot, and I've kind of in my last few years I've come to understand a little bit more about the political system because I came from the private side of the world, and the beautiful thing about doing business in Wyoming is that you don't really have to worry about the government if you don't want to. Yeah, right? Sure. It's like it's not heavy-handed. It's right where it should be, really small and close to the people. So, but what I'm trying to understand is that relationship between the legislative branch and the executive branch. Is in my head, it's sort of like the executive branch is probably closest to the problem, understand the problem, but needs the legislative branch to actually enact the policies that might solve the problem. And that's where a lot of power lies, but there's a lot of information and know-how in the executive branch because those agencies are close to the problem, close to the people. Yeah. And then sort of should have this thing where raise their hand and say, okay, those policies are great, but the problem has changed and we need to change this policy. But I don't always see that. Sometimes I see more of a like butting of heads. And I'd be curious to understand your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think you're always going to have butting of heads, right? And that's part of what makes the system brilliant. Is that if you learned it if you watch Schoolhouse Rock. It's the the checks and balances of the three branches, right? So I think the tension is always going to exist. Yes. The conflict doesn't have to exist. So I think you're right. It's an interesting conception to say that the executive is the closest to the problem. That might be true from a technical standpoint, so if your conception of government is that, look, we can solve all these problems if we just get the smartest technocrats in the agencies to fix the problems, then we're in good shape. But that is essentially that is not what that's not what representative government is, for better or for worse. Personally, I think it's for better. That you just you end up with you're a technocrat with a particular bent, and I'm one with another bent, and
Right.
whoever happens to be in power is doing. That's what we have at the federal level. This constant whiplash of interpretations and technocratic know-how. I think at the legislative level, while the agencies might be like technically closest to the problem,
Right.
the legislators are closest to what the people actually want, and if they are doing their job, they're fighting that out in that process to move as close to what we can get in a representative government as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So both of those are in theory, right?
Yeah.
So let me say it like this. So I think I'm following you. They should be close to the people who elected them.
Right.
Right. They should be.
Right.
And the agencies that work on this should be about the problem, not like maybe the product that they've been doing or the program that they've been doing.
Right.
And what I see a lot of is defending a program, efficacy aside, defend the program, and sort of like maybe represent a certain part of your populace. And so in its best form, I agree. What I'm seeing in practicality is that maybe that relationship is a little bit broken because of the defense of a program and the idea that you know what your populace wants without asking. So let me just like those are the two extremes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it could be, and I don't know how. I think it's different at the national level than it is in Wyoming.
Yep.
Slightly.
Yeah.
Though it's becoming closer together, which I think is a bit of a shame. The old saying that all politics is local, I'm not sure that that's true anymore. It seems that all politics is national at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is theory, but I guess the question I would have about it is what other, it's like, it's the worst possible system except for all the other systems. So like there's no way, like the only way that we know what the constituents are saying is who won the election.
Right.
We can poll all you want, but the only poll that matters is elections.
Is elections, right? Yeah.
And so what I find is that I think this is happening less so in Wyoming, and I would like if there was any way to keep it from moving more towards the national level, I'd be for it. Is that I think people have kind of lost sight of the fact that that durable solutions do require doing whatever you can to try to figure out as best you can as a representative, like what the totality thinks. Mm-hmm. And it's a two-way street. Right. They have to figure that out as a representative as much as they possibly can. But the populace also has to give them the respect and the freedom to make decisions on their behalf. And that relationship, I don't think is where it should be. Right. So it's the.
Do you think that? Let me jump in there. So and I'm trying to understand. So they're saying to themselves, "Hey, I've been elected for these certain elements and views and everything, and now I've got to try to make a decision about the total problem, not just my perspective on the problem." Yeah. And that's hard because as you dig into the problem, you might learn some stuff, right? You might understand it differently than you did before, and that maybe that level of complexity is harder for. I know it was hard for me to understand before I really got into this. My surface level understanding of things is not what I'm finding today as I dig into things. So is that the tension that exists?
I think that's totally the tension. My dad's a great example. He was he read the news. He's a smart guy, stayed connected. He will tell you now he had no idea what he didn't know when he got into the legislature, and his journey of understanding that was pretty remarkable. And I'm proud of him for taking that journey. What he says about it is, he always made the joke that if you have legislators who have been there for 10 years, like him, you can tell the difference between a legislator with 10 years of experience or a legislator with 1 year of experience 10 times. So there's that. The other quote that he reminded me of is former senator from Nebraska, Ben Sass, who's then moved to be the president of the University of Florida. he was like part of the problem with it is it's just not, there's no rallying cry for that kind of thing. Like, he's like, what do we want? Prudent change. When do we want it? In the fullness of time. Like, it doesn't work.
Yeah. It's hard to get elected with that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's hard to keep everybody happy.
Yeah, but the point is that like that breakdown in that relationship has led, definitely on the national level, a little bit here, that that every election is a 100% mandate, and it is and what it says is that you should go for maximalist change, right. And then at least at the federal level, what that's led to is basically people saying, well, we didn't want that every 2 years. Right. And so now we can't settle on anything.
But that's not the way the system was actually built, right? It's not a mandate. It's an opportunity to work within the system from your perspective.
Yeah. Right. So if what you're going for every year is maximalist change, is you're sort of constantly living under this fear that that today you're in the majority and tomorrow you're going to be in the minority. Right. So let's get maximalist change. Right. And then tomorrow the other side will get maximalist change, and that sort of for businesses. Yeah. That's hard. Totally. That is very hard for oil and gas, or for any of the businesses that you work with to try to recruit. And like, well, tell me what the 10-year vision is for Wyoming's tax policy or whatever. Right. And you got to kind of say, well, I don't know.
Yeah. We can look at history.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But that's about it.
Yeah.
So with that, I mean, is that the opportunity that Wyoming has to sort of insulate our industries and our businesses from some of that whipsaw back and forth, or is that something we could strive to do, or is that something that's necessary, or I mean, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's maybe this is naivete on other businesses. What I was about to say is that I think it might be possible for other businesses. For oil and gas, I think it's less possible for two reasons. Okay. One, we're so much controlled by the federal government. Yep. 48% of Wyoming's surface is owned by the federal government, and about 67% of our subsurface is owned by the federal government. So all told, what that means is like approaching 80% of all of Wyoming's natural resources, oil, gas, uranium, coal, all that stuff. About 80%, nearly 80% of it touches federal resources of some kind, which means that their policies control. Okay. And we have limited. I mean, our delegation punches above its weight, always has, but we just have limited ability to control what the feds do. One, more important is Wyoming is part of a global energy market. Right. It's weird to think that, but we really are. I mean, we're small. It's not like we're not Saudi Arabia. Sure. We're not Texas. Right. But we're part of it, and being part of a global energy market means we really don't have control about how the commodity market works. Shocks in Ukraine, shocks in the Middle East, demand plunges in China when they go to total shutdowns for whatever reason. Yeah. All of that changes what my members can do, and ultimately changes like what you're paying at the pump. Absolutely. And everybody kind of looks around for who to blame for that, and it's difficult because you can blame everyone and no one. It's a global phenomenon. Yeah, that's pretty wild. So if you were to kind of look at this as a okay, we've got the petroleum industry, and that is a major factor in Wyoming. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really has generated a lot of wealth. It's generated a lot of revenue for the state. It has been just such a powerful industry, and we hope it will continue to be. Yep. And I'm an and person. I think a lot of times people are like, well, we're going to go in this direction and we're going to leave everybody out. And it's like, no. We all have to go together. Yeah. Right? Like the industries that have been around and have made Wyoming what they are, extraction, tourism, agriculture, those things are good. Like we should continue that. That's a great thing. Right. One of the things that we're working on is to sort of what we call increase the economic complexity. And that really is, it's another way of saying diversification,
but we're trying to sort of raise that bar and grow our communities, because we know that the size at which our communities are today, especially our bigger population centers, it's not enough to sort of perpetuate an economy the size that they are. And I mean that in that we would continue to experience the ups and downs of natural resources.
Mm-hmm. Whereas
If we could grow those communities to a bigger size, then you have the natural resources, and you have what we might call, some people might call the knowledge sector of jobs, where you have a different industries at play that can propagate, and they require population. That's just all there is to it. So we're sort of caught in this really interesting place, because a lot of places don't want to grow, and that's okay. But some places do want to grow. And the question I have for you is, as we work to increase that knowledge sector and continue to increase our natural resource sectors, right now the natural resource sectors pay the bill. Mm-hmm. They have, and they, in our current fiscal system, they will continue to.
Right.
So talk to me about that. That's a tension, because I think that everything that could be changed, we should look at changing it, right? If the fiscal system needs changed to better support the future of natural resources and knowledge sector, let's go.
Yeah.
But that's not the way it is today. So talk to me about your, maybe speak for your members about their stance on sort of paying the way for other industries. What's that feel like?
Yeah, my members run the gamut, politically, but also just in sort of personal opinion. I think one of the coolest things about Wyoming's oil and gas industry is how much of it is small business. I've said this a lot. You've probably heard me say it. It's just we have kind of sort of big companies, like medium size independent companies, and like the ones I mentioned before that do most of the production, 2/3 of the production. But there's a full third of Wyoming's production is produced by about 350 or so companies that individually produce 1% or less of the total. So for Wyoming, a full third. So to your point about the paying the freight in terms of tax revenue and all of that, if it like that, each individual company may not be material to that, but collectively having those small businesses here is very material, and that changes our policy quite a bit on how we do things, and it changes sort of the attitude a little bit as well, because those are the folks, like they're right here, you know what I mean? They're absolutely your neighbor, they're in the school, they're doing whatever, and they care about the communities every darn bit as much as anybody else. Absolutely. And so they're quite proud, actually, of the contributions that they make. And the bigger guys are too. There's really no. My members are not calling me every day saying, geez, the tax code is like, you got to do something about this. We do talk about it, and I talk about it a lot, because Wyoming's tax code for oil and gas is the highest of oil and gas states. We have the highest rate of oil and gas states in the lower 48. So above places that really don't like oil and gas, like Colorado and New Mexico and all that. We're way above them in terms of taxes, which is kind of wild. Yeah. So there is that problem, but it's not like there's not. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's not a lot of resentment about it.
There's not resentment.
Let me put it that way. But if they could choose a lower tax rate, they would. But
because they have economics, they have to work through to make sure that what they're pulling out of the ground is profitable. Right?
Yeah, right. I think just speaking for myself, to answer your question more directly, it's two sides of the same coin. It's been good for Wyoming in the sense that we've been able to build the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund that kicks out millions of dollars every year, that keeps everybody else's taxes low and all that, and that's great. Like, that actually is really good to have this big sovereign wealth fund that we have that's entirely from minerals. What I worry about it, Josh, is that I don't think, for the state of Wyoming, I don't think it's a sustainable picture. And you just like you just look at the COVID years, 2020 and 21, economically speaking.
Yep.
You know, in July of 2020, we laid down every rig in Wyoming.
Yep.
First time in our state's history, we had no rigs running.
Right.
That lasted for about 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And then some intrepid producer stood up another rig and we were kind of back. And we came back to the rescue. But there was a 2-year period where we were not providing revenue to the state the way we normally do.
Right.
And that's about as long as we can withstand it before a crisis happens.
Right.
And I just think we've gotten really used to, and you'll have to, you interact with other businesses so much more than I do. We've gotten really used to the fact that natural resources pays the way. And I don't blame anybody for that, of course. But it is what it is. It's great, and it's always going to happen. And I'm going to do my level best to make sure that does happen.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm perfectly happy and proud that we can ride to the rescue a lot.
Yeah.
There might be a day when we can't ride to the rescue, and we don't have a system in place to be prepared for that. Yeah. Other than the Permanent Trust Fund, which isn't big enough to handle that.
And the other thing that I think sometimes happens when someone always comes to the rescue is you don't exhaust other options.
Yeah.
You don't think about other ways to solve this problem because, well, somebody will come to the rescue, or I don't even know who that somebody is.
Yeah.
You know, because all of these things are all of these services that I get, I don't even know where it comes from.
Yeah.
Right. And because we sort of take it for granted that it will.
Yeah.
And we'll ride it out. And you see bumper stickers from the 80s that say, grant me another boom, and I promise I won't mess it up.
Right.
But, those continue to
exist.
And
I give our policymakers a lot of credit. I think they learned from that bumper sticker slogan, and they did, like the Petroleum Trust Fund and all those sorts of things. They did do that.
Yeah.
And that's good for Wyoming. And look, I think it's actually, I know there's a big part of the current legislature that says, when they hear what I just said previously, what you just said, they're like, look, the solutions we just spend less. Yeah. And I actually think like having that conversation in that process, the legislative process, is good and right to take a look at, okay, what are we spending and why are we spending it? And do we have to be everything for everybody? Right. What is government's role? Some will say government's role is only, for defense and for, fire protection. Yep. That's it.
Yep.
And then others will say, now we got to have, it has to be so much more than that. It's about I've heard the phrase at the Capitol a lot that government is just, it's just another, I guess President Obama used to say this, the government is just another name for what we do together. So those are kind of the two ends of the spectrum, and that's where that plays out. But all of it, I think, is fair game to talk about for Wyoming.
Yeah.
Again, in my personal opinion, I don't have any. My members are like they're proud to be here. They're proud to pay their taxes.
Yeah.
They do not mind, paying the way for homeowners, particularly who are who need it. We hear a lot about fixed income and all that, about property taxes going up, and we're perfectly happy to pay for that. I think where we get a little bit, or at least I get a little bit, bent out of shape is we're not the only kind of big business in Wyoming. There's other big business, national, multinational companies, that operate in Wyoming, and there's no tax code for them, really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Right. So,
right.
I don't mind, I don't mind in a lot of senses, except for kind of in that narrow scope, but we're just not in a place where we're going to do anything about that, at least currently. Yeah.
Well, so Pete, you and I could probably talk for many more hours on all these, but we should do that. We should do another one of these.
All right.
Because one of the things that I want to talk with you about, and it's not necessarily to do with PAW, but maybe it's at the little bit of the policy side of stimulus and response.
Yeah.
And what I mean is that right now, and we're gonna queue up this is queuing up the sequel. Okay. So this is like think of the end of a Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what we're attempting to do.
Right.
So what I'd like to talk to you about is this idea that at a community level, our communities don't have a revenue source that increases as their population increases. They have a revenue source that increases as perhaps maybe some of their big property taxpayers increase, right? We see that in the data center game in Cheyenne. Or if extraction does really well at the state or at the local level. Or they get a distribution from the state. And so what our communities are faced with is a policy that basically says, oh yeah, we would love for you to grow, but we're not really saying that because we're saying if you do grow, you're going to be spread thin.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is that the system is designed for stagnation or shrinkage. Like that's what we're really designed for, because as a community, as you grow, you just have to spread your revenue thinner. So that means more potholes. That means less parks. That means less all of those things that people sort of either want fixed or want in addition to the things that they get in their life. They want those things, but a community is constrained because our policies say you can grow if you choose, but it's probably not going to work out from a dollars and cents perspective to run a community. And so what I'm looking at it from is if you are punished for an action, you're not going to do that action anymore.
Yeah.
And so how do we look at the system to say you shouldn't necessarily be punished for that action? You should have mechanisms in place so that if you choose to grow, you can do it in a way that allows you to generate revenue to provide the basic services that government should.
Yeah.
Pothole-free roads and maybe some parks and things like that. The private industry won't and probably shouldn't do. How do we do that? Because right now this system is getting exactly what it wants, which is a stagnating population, except in a certain band, way out on the demographic of people who don't work, and in a dropping GDP overall. And so I'm gonna let's cue that up. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it because it ties into, we didn't cover it. You alluded to it earlier, but the difference between what you're talking about, expanding and being able to make it work on a dollars and cents side for the public services that people demand, or say that they want.
Yeah.
The other side of it is, of course, kind of what happens in Cheyenne is Cheyenne is probably the closest, and I was going to say Jackson, but that's not really true. Cheyenne is probably the closest to having those separate ecosystems that feed off of each other, that create a little bit more of a dynamism in the economy that's not entirely dependent on one or the other.
That's right.
I think to some people's chagrin, one of those ecosystems is government. So is what it is. But
it's part of the GDP.
Right.
State product.
Right. But that's sort of, I guess, to that question. I mean, it's like you were talking about how do we. Seems to me to always be like the disconnect in these conversations is, what's good for the state and the state government apparatus versus what's good for the dynamism of a local community and business community and all of that. And I don't know, never the two shall meet. I don't know.
This is going to be an awesome sequel. I'm super excited about that because I think that's a big challenge, right? Like that, there seems to be a one or the other, or a one only, and I tend to hear it as like the state revenue picture is so important, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, but
sort of, right.
But there's a disconnect there for sure.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Pete, this was super fun. Good. Well, we'll set up the next one and talk a little bit more about that topic.
Perfect.
And then maybe even bring some other people into the mix.
That'd be great.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Josh.
Appreciate it. Yeah.